Story 1. I received some gossip that a line cook, let's call her Shelley, got promoted to supervisor due to a not-so-covert relationship with the executive chef. One day, a lady working at the salad station found out her daughter was getting her hours cut and was sent home early since it was a slow day. She went straight to the executive chef, and in front of half the staff, she said, "Why aren't you sending Shelley home? Is it because you are having a sexual relationship with her?" To which the chef told her to leave. This started a very lively and highly entertaining argument. I also watched a man complain about a headache, reach into his pocket and take a pill. I asked him if it was Advil, and he said, "No, it's MDMA. I really wish he was joking." Story 2. A man was fired and trapped himself in a cubicle, threatening people with a knife if they walked past. I went in with management and stayed in one of their offices, talking with him while leaning on his desk until the police arrived. He usually carried a gun but did not have it that day. Story 3. This is in the late 1980s. I worked in a hospital pharmacy that was like the United Nations. Indian, Mexican, Italian, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Haitian, and American employees. The Haitian woman was very Catholic, so religious, and in love with a gay Mexican man who was mostly in the closet except for a few of us who were good friends. He was in a relationship with an American pharmacist and they lived together, but most everyone thought they were roommates. She would cook for him, buy him gifts, and have dates that were platonic, but in her mind, he was her boyfriend. The American pharmacist hated it because he was jealous, and she was also jealous of their relationship, so they pretty much hated each other. The hospital was pretty big, and in the back was where all the overstock was kept. I was way in the front, probably about 500 feet from the back, taking care of a nurse when I heard a blood-curdling scream that didn't stop. The Haitian woman came running through the pharmacy, literally screaming at the top of her lungs, and ran out of the hospital screaming. Turned out they got into a fight about her boyfriend, and the real boyfriend told her that they were gay and she would never have him. The men broke up because he was angry that he was outed. Only a few of us knew what really happened, and he never forgave his boyfriend. She never came back, sent someone to pick up her stuff, and we were told she went back to Haiti and entered a convent. Story 4. I was on a work trip, and my boss brought a woman to dinner. They were cuddly and acting like a couple, which was fine until we returned to the office. Then his wife and kids arrived, revealing she was definitely not his dinner date. Story 5. A girl I worked with had her boyfriend come to our job to fight one of our male coworkers after work. They fought in the parking lot. Security had to intervene and break it up. Her boyfriend lost. Story 6. There was a woman at work who needed some time off because her daughter was killed in a car accident. Everyone collected money for flowers and to help with expenses to get this woman out of state. Something felt off to a coworker and me, and we joked that she was probably lying. Our boss reprimanded us severely. Another employee saw the woman's husband during work and asked how everything was going. He had no idea what she was talking about. He said his daughter was fine and was getting ready to welcome her second child. If she had needed time off for that, we would have granted it. But to make up a story that your daughter was killed? Who does that? She never came back to work, and my coworker and I never received an apology. Story 7. I've worked in commercial kitchens for basically my entire adult life. It would be easier for me to do and ask me anything. The scariest person, though, we actually had a safe word after he walked out. We called him Lieutenant Dang because he never swore, and that is a huge red flag in a kitchen. I asked him why one day, and he said he liked to save dirty words for when he's really angry. The weirdest part is he walked out arguing over how traditional tiramisu is made. He started screaming about how we're a bunch of dumb people, even though he was one of the least skilled, most worthless cooks I've ever worked with. Story 8. I had a coworker whom we will call Bob. Bob was a relatively peaceful guy, but you could tell there was something wrong with him. They regularly fired people from this job, and Bob always told everyone, "If I'm ever fired, it better be when I'm at home. I'd rather be called and told I'm fired than come to work and find out in person. I don't want to come to work happy and prepared my lunch just to be sent home." Well, he was fired. All hell broke loose. He was in charge of cutting drywall at the job, and he grabbed the drywall and smashed it to pieces. He smashed the saw too. He threw an empty propane tank at the wall and destroyed a lot of property. Eventually, the police were involved, and Bob was escorted away. Honestly, the job was terrible, and Bob became a legend in my eyes. Story 9. This was when I was in high school working at Round Table Pizza. We had some cool assistant managers who, once the closing duties were finished, would let us use the beer taps. One of the morning employees who made dough was kind of creepy and made it known that there was a hole over the toilet in the women's restroom. This was far back from the platform in the attic where supplies were stored, so you would have to be on the rafters only. One night, one of the assistant managers went to the restroom, and 3 or 4 guys hurried up to the attic to try to get a look. One of the men fell through the ceiling and into the stall with the assistant manager. The man who fell and 2 other men who were up there were fired on the spot. Story 10. Saw a young man launch a cardboard case containing approximately 50 crystal champagne flutes. It was a poor job at a wedding and community center, and the man suddenly snapped. I do not know what triggered him, but I never saw him again. Every glass broke, and the mess was extensive, happening 2 hours before a fancy wedding reception. The damage was well over $1,000. Story 11. A woman who had been let go refused to leave her desk. She was required to turn her badge into security and leave the campus. Her credentials had already been revoked, so she could not log in. They gave her a box for her belongings, but she would not pack them. She repeatedly shouted, "We are not doing this today." Security instructed her to stand up so they could escort her out. One security guard began placing her items in the box, and she removed them to set them back on her desk. She refused to get up from her chair. This continued for 30 minutes. Only after being informed that the police had been called did she agree to leave the premises. It was unclear if she believed things would change if she stayed at her desk. Story 12. I worked at a convenience store where we had a setup for hot foods. There was a large case for chicken, corn dogs, and pork tenderloins. One day, the person usually on the fryer had enough. He walked up to the case, took out a tenderloin, put it down his pants, rubbed himself on it while flipping off the camera, and then tossed it back into the food case. He walked out of the building while making rude gestures at the cameras and the manager. It must have been very hot. I don't know how he could stand rubbing himself on a hot fried tenderloin, but he did. We had to empty the case, throw out all the food, including fresh chicken, and then sterilize the chicken case before putting food back into it. The manager did nothing. It was only the coworkers left behind who dealt with the consequences. Story 13. The director of our department was fired. When she was told, she started crying and ran out of the room. She hid all over the building, mostly in the warehouse. Took 2 hours to find her and escort her out, crying the entire time. Story 14. A chronic masturbator leads security on a literal wild goose chase. I was hired right out of college at a technology company. The building has 3 floors. The 3rd floor has a channel on Microsoft Teams for mostly men called Gus Time. I am not a man, but a few of the guys I am friendly with invited me because, and I quote, "You won't believe it." I thought, okay, weird, but who am I to deny fun? All the messages on this channel were basically some version of Gus just went in or Gus just left. One day at happy hour, I asked what the Gus channel was about. A few men burst out laughing and explained. Gus works on the support team and uses the 3rd floor bathroom to publicly masturbate. I asked why no one said anything. They said, "How do you tell a guy to stop masturbating at the sink without it becoming a whole thing?" Weeks later, we hired a new employee who somehow missed the memo and went into the bathroom during Gus time. He rushed out and went straight to human resources. A couple of days later, Gus received a letter from a therapist stating he has a severe panic disorder and this is a coping mechanism which is protected by law. Gus became part of a protected class and was allowed to work from home. Suddenly, Gus's performance slipped. He was asked to meet with management and human resources and was fired for performance reasons unrelated to his protected class. Gus got up, refused to turn in his badge, ran away, and the security guard, embodying Paul Blart from the movie, chased him outdoors near the retention pond. It was goose egg season, and during the foot chase, they ran past an active nest. A male goose began hissing and warding them off with wing flapping. Gus slipped in the grass. The security guard tried to grab him, but the angry goose pursued and began pecking them. The security guard had to use pepper spray on the goose. We were all at the windows at this point. Human Resources called the police, and they took Gus away. The security guard quit. Story 15. This lady brought her goat to the Human Resources party. The goat ate the salad bar, and then her boyfriend, who came with the goat, passed out drunk in the cheesecake. Nobody said anything. Story 16. I worked with a man at a gas station who was openly selling drugs to the subway employees we shared the building with while standing at the cash register. Customers would come in and say, "Hey, I am pretty sure I saw the man who opened selling drugs behind the building. He was not as covert as he believed." The store manager allowed it because she did not want to get up early to open the store, and he would do it for her. Story 17. I used to work in fashion design, and I had a coworker who kept a flat iron at her desk. She would nervously iron her hair throughout the day. I am amazed she never started a fire. Story 18. Told this one before, but when I was delivering pizzas, I got shot 6 times in the chest by some kid wanting to steal my car. The guy I was delivering to just happened to be a pararescue jumper, an elite military medical specialist, and he stabilized me until an ambulance arrived. I managed to call my best friend and speak to him. I asked him to take care of my dogs, and he did. He and his dad came to the hospital as I was going into surgery. Work kept calling my phone, and finally Parker's dad answered. It was my manager angrily saying I was fired for taking too long on the route. After my boss was informed what had happened, his response was, and I quote, "Well, that's just great. Now I need to find coverage for the rest of the weekend." Parker's father is the most polite and well-spoken man I have ever known. I had known him for 15 years at the time and had never once heard him raise his voice or curse. He absolutely laid into my boss, called him every profane name, and told him he was on speakerphone with an entire waiting room of my family and friends listening. Luckily, I made a full recovery, but the manager did not lose his job despite everyone I know calling the corporate office. Last I checked, he was still there, his own personal hell, I guess. Story 19. I run a small festival and we get a lot of volunteers. Most are incredible, and we appreciate them very much. One volunteer behaved extremely poorly. She showed up for her 4-hour shift at the gate, asked if anyone wanted anything from the bottle shop, and then left the site for 3.5 hours. When she returned, she nearly ran some festival attendees over in her car and proceeded to tell people she was with First Aid and started treating them. First Aid, our safety officer, and security had to dismiss her immediately. Months later, we are still receiving emails from her saying she cannot wait to volunteer for us again next year. Now, Story 20. I worked in a federal office with some contractors included. It was a very uptight, staunch, and high-level office setting. One of the contractors had clearly never worked in an office. She was shockingly unprofessional. One day she arrived several hours late, obviously intoxicated. She ranted about a mushroom ceremony the night before and how she had met her soulmate. She cornered me and started loudly, in front of many coworkers, describing in detail what he had done to her the night before. I had to yell, "Stop! Please stop and let me leave." It was very inappropriate. I ran to Human Resources and explained that I was not participating in that conversation and that I felt trapped. She was taller and stronger than I am. It is a funny story now, but at the time I was mortified. That was really the culmination of months of such incidents. They still did not fire her until they caught her stealing. At one point during her rant, she grabbed her crotch and moaned, "Oh, my genital area is so sore." Story 21. I worked with a man who carried a flask with him at all times. Everyone knew he had a flask and that he drank from it all day. He absolutely reeked of liquor. Once, he came in on his day off to grab something from his locker and then left. About an hour later, his girlfriend arrived. Looking for him, he had driven there with her, and she was sitting outside waiting for him. The man literally forgot his girlfriend had driven him and wandered home. Eventually, he stopped showing up. I ran into him a couple of years later. He still reeked of liquor and did not remember who I was. Story 22. We had Christmas temporary employees at an old workplace. They worked on the customer service phones. One person was constantly late and would spend a long time in the break room area on a bean bag. He was let go, and afterward we found 3-liter empty bottles of vodka under the bean bag. Fair play to him for getting away with being intoxicated in the office as long as he did. Story 23. During my first month of nursing school rotation, a medical student at the hospital where I worked was having some sort of romantic issues with someone in the hospital. They got into a big fight and he took a charge nurse's chair, smashed 2 computers, then threw his badges, pager, and other belongings down. He shouted, "Bill me, please," along with some remarks about his likely ex, and walked out mid-shift. Nothing even remotely that interesting happened during the rest of my nursing rotations. Story 24. A deer ran into the office through a fire door that had been left open. It did not understand why it could not get back outside through any of the industrial-strength glass walls. The deer was distracted from butting the glass when the managing director entered to see what the noise was about. The deer promptly decided that the managing director was its arch-enemy and needed to be defeated. Utter chaos ensued. I did not know the man had it in him to move so fast. He eventually ran into the server room to escape and called some of the warehouse staff for help. They managed to herd the deer back outside. It has since become our office legend. Story 25. 2 co-workers had some personal conflict that I don't quite understand to this day. Some misunderstanding or another, and they decided to walk into the cargo elevator for privacy. Not realizing the cargo elevator sits inside a massive shaft that runs up and down the entire building, their yelling and screaming could be heard by everyone. Not much came of it other than a stern warning that they should maintain professionalism and not bring personal issues into the workplace. Still, it was pretty funny seeing them walk out of that elevator and, for a few seconds, thinking nobody knew they were arguing until they realized everyone was staring at them. Story 26. A man was arrested for shoplifting and retail theft and had an uncontrollable fit that lasted for 30 minutes. This occurred in the United States. He was English and afraid he would be deported. He truly defined the word hysterical. Do not steal if you are worried about being deported. This was a long time ago. He might well be deported now. Story 27. Watching a man's hand melt off from sticking it into a deep fryer is high on my list. Not number 1, but at least in the top 10. Probably. Story 28. Not my coworker, but someone who worked in my downtown office building. A friend and I were on the sidewalk having a smoke when a large cathode ray tube computer monitor came crashing onto the sidewalk, followed by glass, a computer, a keyboard, and finally a chair. Apparently, a man on the 12th floor was left alone in the Human Resources office after they notified him that he was being fired. Story 29. At an old job, I was working on a construction project that involved emailing potential contractors to arrange the removal of construction waste. I contacted a company using the email listed on their website and had a pleasant exchange with a woman who provided all the information I needed. About an hour later, I received an email from another employee at the firm saying something like, "Hello, I'm male employee's name. The manager of company name, who original female employee's name, has the privilege of working for. Please direct all requests to me." In that message, privilege was bold and underlined, as if he was petty and upset that this woman had resolved a matter directly addressed to her. He seemed to be reprimanding or subtly threatening her in a message to me, a potential client. Beyond the pettiness of this odd power play, there was also a racial angle, as she had a name typically associated with black individuals, and he had a very wasp-like name. It was a bizarre way to communicate with a client about an issue that had already been resolved satisfactorily. Story 30. A former colleague of mine pretended to have skin cancer. He left work for treatments and wore dressings on his wounds. He was found to be lying after 6 months and was escorted off the site by security. We worked in a hospital known for its oncology department, so he was not popular. Story 31. A mechanic at the chemical plant where I worked decided to steal some copper tubing by wrapping it around his chest and covering it with his jacket. It was really cold when he clocked out and the copper constricted, so he could not breathe by the time he got to the guard gate. The guards had a good laugh unwinding him. Story 32. A woman came to work extremely intoxicated. She passed out at the front desk, so coworkers pushed her chair into the staff workroom. She woke up, thought she was in the bathroom, took off her pants, and urinated on the floor. Story 33. I used to work at Longhorn Steakhouse. I watched a lady walk up to a birthday table, pick up the cake, throw it at the girl, and then proceed to hit her. Wild. I did not get paid enough for that. Glad it was not my table. Also, one time a lady got so blackout drunk at the bar that her date left her. She was nearly passed out, holding hands with my manager while I helped support her in her bar stool. She was a police officer, too. Story 34. The service manager threw open the security door into the engineering bay with a belt-fed Nerf gun and started raining darts down on everyone completely out of the blue. He did not elaborate. After that, many of us brought in Nerf guns too. A few people had drones we sometimes played with in the back, and those drones would turn off and crash if they detected any kind of shock. This made me curious, what would happen if you hit a drone with a Nerf dart? So, I used a Nerf gun to shoot down a drone at work once. That company was a little like a sitcom in hindsight. There were some really good people and great times. We created some cool projects and were punching way above our weight for being so small and winning mostly. Unfortunately, there were some deeply dysfunctional aspects too. Story 35. Saw the boyfriend of a coworker come in and try to stab him. He ran, and the man instantly chased after him. The coworker survived and came back to work. A few months later, I saw the police come in and arrest the same coworker. He did not lose his job. Watched my large boss beat up a man in a 7-Eleven parking lot for stealing cartons of cigarettes. Once I got over being shocked, it was pretty hilarious to watch this massive black man, usually calm and funny, completely overpower this small, skinny person struggling with addiction. I was not surprised to hear that when someone tried to rob Herb's store, this hero followed the man outside, knocked him out, and retrieved the money. At a truck stop, an overdose, survived. Grand mal seizure with unconsciousness and loss of bladder control. A pit bull killed by gunfire. The Oak Ridge Boys performing, multiple fistfights and grand theft auto. Watched my 17-year-old male coworker get his face slapped so hard I saw sweat fly by a 16-year-old female coworker. He would not stop hitting on her, and she hated him. I nearly coughed up a lung laughing because I told him to leave her alone since she did not like him. But he did not listen. Story 36. I used to be a server and saw a coworker doing lines off the top of the toilet tank. He then proceeded to rant about the strangest things and sweat profusely throughout the shift. At the same place, we had a coworker who was often drunk during shifts. We could smell it on him. He came in still intoxicated, fell down, hit his head on a chair, and was sent home. His face was bruised and swollen when he came in the next day. At another restaurant, two line cooks got into a fight that spilled out into the dining room. They were yelling and threatening each other. One of them had a knife. It was wild. Our manager had to compensate a lot of food that day. Story 37. A student intern was joking with other students and told them that she had syphilis and was going to give it to them. The students reported her. She apparently did not know what syphilis was. This was not the last time she said something without understanding the meaning of the words. Story 38. Worked in a weed dispensary. We had dividers with solid wood between each checkout area for privacy, as it was a medical dispensary. A difficult customer came in, and we did not have the product she wanted. She proceeded to scream loudly and repeatedly smashed her head into the wooden dividers between the stations. Armed guards intervened and stopped her. Her head was bloody, and she continued screaming until they escorted her out. Absolutely wild. Story 39. Federal Government Office. A supervisor snapped and choked an employee. Of course, chaos ensued. The command's lawyer threatened every witness with dismissal if they spoke about it. Thanks to one strong woman, one of the government unions, the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association, was voted in. All respect to Kathy W. Story 40. A man who worked at our shop for a couple of weeks seemed trustworthy. One Wednesday, state police officers visited along with agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The man immediately dropped everything and sprinted to the emergency exit, jumped over the security fence, and got severely cut on the concertina wire. He fled and was never seen again. Then, our shop supervisor was led out in handcuffs, looking pale and defeated. He and his wife had been operating a file-sharing ring on the dark web. Story 41. I used to work in a five-star hotel and had a boss who enjoyed pretending he was better than everyone else. One time, he provoked the chef so much that the chef chased him with a knife around the restaurant, shouting and swearing. Nothing came of it, as far as I know, despite human resources being aware. Story 42. As a teenager, I worked in the children's section of the public library. I was 16 at the time and was flashed twice in one day. Story 43. I used to work at a feed and grain store. I was once rearranging shelves and asked a nearby customer if she needed help finding anything. She was holding a young ferret and asked if I wanted to hold it. Next thing I knew, I was holding a young ferret. Not particularly surprising, but certainly unexpected. Story 44. I once had a store manager, a woman in her 30s, married with 2 children, sit on the floor of our store with her legs stretched out in front of her, and have a full toddler tantrum because the St. Louis Blues were knocked out in the first round of the playoffs. She said, "We've never made it past the second round, and we're one of the oldest teams." For 30 minutes, she had a red face and streaming tears. I am not from Missouri. I am from Minnesota, so I am used to all my teams disappointing me. This was the most unhinged thing I had ever seen any sports fan do in public. What made it worse was that we worked in a sports clothing store, so we sold fan gear for all the Missouri teams and several colleges. She did this in front of customers and fellow fans. Story 45. I had the chief accounting officer tell me that my family was waiting for me in the lobby at my previous job. It was a group of Asian women who had come in that day to look at the computer numerical control machines that were for sale. I told her my family does not know where I worked and they would tell me they are visiting before showing up. This happened on a Friday afternoon, so I had all weekend to think about what had just happened. I went in on Monday and spoke to my supervisor, and all he said was, "This is not who we are." Sure. Then I spoke with Human Resources, who also said the same thing. I left a few months later for a better job, better manager, and better company. Story 46. A customer stabbed a sign at the gas station where I used to work, then threatened one of the employees. Story 47. 2 men got into an argument at the shop across the street while getting lunch, and one stabbed the other to death. Story 48. I work at a hospital with a large emergency department, and a significant portion of that area is dedicated to behavioral health patients. They are in rooms that are suicide-proof, with everything secured behind what resembles a garage door. So they do not have monitors, leads, phones, or anything similar. Because they are on an involuntary hold, they are also changed into green gowns. One time, the department was so full that patients were in the hallways. Someone forgot to remove the oxygen tank from the bottom of a gurney in one of the behavioral health rooms. When a nurse attended to patient 1 to administer medication, he grabbed the oxygen tank and threatened her, saying he was going to harm her. Across the hall, another patient on a hold, patient 2, started yelling at patient 1 to stop being abusive to his nurse. Patient 1 then challenged patient 2 to a fight, pushed past his nurse, and started running down the hall, attempting to escape through the ambulance bay. Patient 1 was only wearing socks, no shoes. He rounded the corner, slid into the large trauma room doors, and broke one. Patient 2 caught up and started attacking him. Everyone was tasered. I have many intense stories about the emergency department. Story 49. I worked at a local brewery. There was a very annoying, loud-mouthed semi-regular who would come in often and always drank an 8% stout. One day, he was there for hours talking to some off-duty employees who were sitting at the bar. During that time, he told us his full government name, where he worked, where he lived, showed us all of his visible tattoos and piercings, and even pointed out his vehicle outside. After probably 6 beers, the bartender cut him off. Angry, he pulled out a pocket knife and said, "I'll cut you off," and cut the bartender's neck. The wound was shallow, and the bartender was fine, but he was definitely bleeding. The man immediately fled. Luckily, we knew everything about him, so it was very easy to describe him to the police. He cut a hole through the bartender's collar, and the bartender wore that shirt all the time as a joke, saying, "I bled for this place." Story 50. I am the chief information officer at a large company and was relatively new at the time. Two of my team members made a mistake setting up a video conference for the chief human resources officer. She called a meeting to show them everything they did wrong and reprimand them. She did not invite me or even inform me. My team members told me about it. She was upset and visibly agitated when I walked in. I let her speak for a while. She kept it constructive at first, but you could see her getting more worked up. Without provocation, she started yelling at them as if I were not in the room. Just as I was about to intervene, she picked up a large conference room chair and threw it at one of them. I told my team to leave. They left quickly. I then spoke with her about how inappropriate that behavior was. She did not apologize, but it did not matter. I went to our general counsel's office and filed a formal complaint. The chief human resources officer retired a week later. Story 51. A coworker danced completely naked on the bar after closing. He was not fired. Another coworker came close to beating his girlfriend after closing. He was fired. Story 52. I worked at a fairly toxic night shift workplace where a couple of the team managers would scream at employees loudly if they were particularly unhappy. They were both supervisors who had clearly been promoted due to competence in the basic role but lacked any people skills. They managed to lower the morale of the entire place without even being the highest level managers. Fortunately, my own team managers were quite calm. Story 53. 1980s. 1. I had a gay boss who was the front office manager of a hotel, and he hired young, attractive boys around 17 years old as bellmen. He would sexually assault them in back rooms and supply closets. As a front desk clerk, I would regularly hide them under my desk when the manager was nearby. I covered for them by telling him, "Oh, they just took some bags up to a room for a guest," or a similar excuse. 2. In another job, I was the manager, but my boss told me not to hire any person of color because they are too much trouble, even when those candidates were the best for the job. Later, he denied ever saying that when confronted. 3. In yet another job, the food and beverage manager was very untrustworthy. He was cheating on his wife with at least 3 women I knew of. The women confided in me, although I did not want to be involved, telling me how much they loved him. One of the women, who was 18 years old, became pregnant by him and got an abortion. They were all co-workers. Once, he tried to approach me as if to tell me something, but the disgust on my face was obvious. Story 54. I was 17 and working at a large retail store that has since closed. Several guys I went to high school with also worked there. They were all 18, so they offered to help an assistant manager with an overnight project. I arrived at 6 a.m. the next day, and the back room was destroyed with paint everywhere. It turned out they had all used cocaine and opened paintball guns and paintballs, creating chaos throughout the night. They sobered up around 5 a.m. The assistant manager erased the security footage, and they all left. Story 55. Working overnight at a hotel in downtown Denver, I had a domestic violence episode erupt on the 3rd floor, then cascade down to the lobby in a series of noise complaint calls. As I was trying to get the police on the phone, a woman and her child burst into the lobby through the inner doors, frantic about a man trying to hurt them. Just as I was starting to understand what was happening, the man burst in, obviously intoxicated, angry, and aggressive. I had the woman and child cowering behind me, shrinking into the back office and prep area while the man yelled threats. I managed to grab an improvised weapon about the size of a crowbar to defend us. It was enough to block the man as I screamed at him to leave and that the police were on their way from 2 blocks away. The man finally bolted out the door and waited shirtless outside until the police arrived and took him away. Domestic disputes. When I was working graveyard shifts at the ski resort Keystone, one person attempted suicide by drinking bleach overnight in employee housing. Another incident involved a drunk person walking down the highway after bar close at 2 a.m. in midwinter, who was hit by another intoxicated person driving home from the conference center. I was working phone dispatch and guest services, so I received the first calls about both incidents. Story 56. At my job, two older women with very strong personalities always fought. One day, they really got into it to the point where one of them shouted, "I hope COVID kills you." For context, this was at the height of the COVID epidemic, and the woman she was mad at was medically frail. She was walked out with her stuff on the spot. Story 57. I work in a factory. There used to be an old, strange man who worked here, and he always bragged about the drugs he used to take back in the day. We thought he might still be using them. One day, some of us were in the office doing paperwork when he started telling us how he had crabs and poured alcohol all over his crotch to try to kill them. He went into a lot of gross and disgusting details while I was sitting there asking a manager to make him stop. He did not stay much longer. He was an unpleasant person. Story 58. An ex-convict came into our office seeking help finding work. He had "Forget the police" tattooed across his scalp, along with tattoos on his face and neck. My first thought was that he needed to grow his hair out to cover as much as possible, and then we could figure out the rest. Throughout the week, he came in and used the computer lab like anyone else. Then one day he was there, and the room smelled terrible. Everyone else left because the odor was unbearable. He then took out a cat from his backpack. It was on a leash and lifeless. He proceeded to drag it around the office, saying it was his friend Oscar Mayer, whom he had been bringing in all week and taking to the park. It is really sad that some people cannot handle life on the outside. Story 59. I worked at a luxury car dealership in Atlanta. We had a very important person rebate program with corporate celebrities. I got approval for Usher, Tyler Perry, and Freddie Freeman. Received a couple of $1,000s knocked off their cars in exchange for a picture in front of the car with the salesperson. One day, our manager sold a car to a rapper, and the whole dealership was buzzing. I had to call corporate to get the very important person paperwork approved, and the representative on the other end was explicitly clear: we could not have our brand attached to that name. It was not about the person or the music, but the name they objected to. Young Thug did not get approved. Young Thug then went on a loud, expletive-filled rant that I cannot type or repeat, but the gist was that he believed himself to be the most famous, very important person in all of Atlanta. I left the manager's office soon after, but I can tell you he never earned a loyalty rebate either. Story 60. I work at a baseball club. One of our best players was a teacher at a high school, and he was fired for inappropriate conduct with a student. Everyone has seen the evidence, including pictures. Despite this, I still see him at every practice. Story 61. Conference call team meeting. During the roundtable discussion, he asks our manager if the company would pay to install an ignition breathalyzer on his vehicle, as he recently received a driving under the influence driving ban. She tries to tell him they should discuss this privately, not at a team meeting. He argues that since he has to travel for work, the installation should be a company expense. Story 62. I managed to get Doom running on the cash register once. They patched the exploit. I used to do so the next season, and I was very sad. Story 63. Caught a former temporary employee overhire using cocaine in the restroom, along with a few others. Yes, I kicked them out. That was bad enough. Many months later, he was arrested and convicted for murdering his parents in their home, which was also his home. The murders occurred well after the incident at the workplace. Story 64. I worked in an old building that had bats roosting in the walls, and every few years, one would find its way into the store. This time, one was flying around during our busiest season while we had a bunch of seasonal temporary employees on the roster. My boss tended to lower their standards during that time, so some of the temporary workers were pretty unprofessional or just plain odd. The temporary employee in this story had already been caught making out with two different coworkers in the backstock area while on the clock and was generally a pain to work with. The boss decided it was too late in the season to train someone new, so he was not fired. One of the higher-ups was trained in handling and rescuing bats and was already vaccinated against rabies. They were called, and we were all told on our radios that they were on their way and to leave the bat alone if we saw it. 5 minutes later, one of the employees who had a crush on the temporary worker paged, saying, "There is a bat flying around in the store. My manager reiterated that we already knew that and to keep our distance. A few minutes later, the employee paged again, asking, "Does anyone have a box or something to bring?" Temporary worker, caught the bat but does not have any gloves on. I was standing next to my boss the entire time, confused why they were not panicking. So I quickly paged that the temporary worker needed to get a rabies shot as soon as possible if he had touched the bat. My boss finally noticed something was wrong when I mentioned rabies and frantically paged, "Do not touch the bat. Leave it alone. Someone is on their way to get it." My manager then yelled, "He is literally holding it in his bare hands right now," over the walkie-talkie. Chaos ensued as everyone tried to convince the temporary worker to release the bat instead of transferring it to a box because we did not want anyone else to risk contact. We also tried to prevent customers from noticing and getting frightened. Later, my boss had a very serious discussion about what had happened. The temporary worker insisted he did nothing wrong because no one was doing anything about the bat situation despite the paged messages. At one point he yelled, "You need to call animal control," meaning he still did not realize someone was already on their way and everyone but him and the employee who paged knew that the entire time. The temporary worker also tried to refuse getting a rabies shot because he was against vaccinations, even though my boss was willing to pay the medical bills out of pocket. The boss explained how serious this vaccine was and that rabies has no cure, but still had to basically force him into a car to take him to the hospital while threatening legal action if he refused. The bat was held for observation for a couple of weeks and thankfully did not have rabies despite being active during the day. The temporary worker, though, was still not fired. The boss was the real fool in this story. Summary: a temporary employee needlessly grabbed a live bat with his bare hands, held it for several minutes, and then tried to refuse a rabies shot. Story 65. Damn, you guys don't really have crazy jobs. I have witnessed all of humanity with my job. I have had staff have sex with homeless women in bathrooms who asked them for a cigarette. I had one employee disappear because he slept with a customer. We only found out because the customer returned the employee's boots to us. He had 3 kids and a wife. I have had mafia come and collect money from staff. I have seen 3-way encounters in clients' homes. We even had one employee go into someone's home while the man was having sex with his girlfriend, and the entire apartment was covered in filth. They didn't stop while my staff worked. One of my former employees got paid, allowing him to buy his antipsychotic medication. This led to him selling them on the break room table. Another employee didn't have money, so he traded acid for random pills. The first employee took the pills and proceeded to tell clients that his cousin in the trees was telling them not to tip. Then he lost his gloves, leading him to treat everyone with a knife, and I had to walk him off the job site. He was in a full Spider-Man suit. I had a female staff member selling pictures to a man, which was mild. She then beat up a man for giving her flack. She was in a reindeer outfit. We have had staff hide glass in other people's food to win bets, and hold their hands over a generator to win bets. We had a delivery driver defecate himself and leave the dirty underwear in the van while working. We even had a man begging for his job on his hands and knees, claiming he was a soldier for us. We fired him for stealing the van and showing up hours later drunk. We had one man show up with a gun squad to get paid. That was intense. Nearly all of my staff have had sex with customers or each other. I actually only know one employee out of about 28 who hasn't slept with a customer. The stories go on and on. Edit. Forgot the craziest story. We had a few go out drinking and one man got into a fight in a bar. They stepped outside. The man who doesn't work for me pulled out a knife. One of my employees grabbed the knife and stabbed him 7 times. We negotiated handing the man over to the police after hiding my employee for a few days. He got 7 years. Story 66. This happened about 20 years ago at a software company with over 100 employees. We had offices with 2 to 3 people per office, not cubicles. One employee was repeatedly damaging another coworker's space. The monitor and chair were knocked over, the keyboard and desk were covered in saliva, and papers were torn up. The employee was fired as soon as he was caught, but this behavior continued every couple of days for a few weeks. I never learned the reason for his issue with the coworker, but I heard many stories about him talking to others about using large amounts of acid, ecstasy, and cocaine regularly. I do not mind recreational drug use, but that is not something you want to be casually sharing with coworkers in an office environment. Story 67. An employee got their arm caught in a moving belt and was pulled through a sprocket. They were unable to move the belt and free their hand until the paramedics arrived because the trapped hand was preventing massive blood loss. A contractor breaking up concrete with a jackhammer hit a power line. He had been told the area was cleared. Thankfully, he was not severely injured. An electrical arc was visible over the top of the nearby building. Story 68. Worked at a Harley dealership 20 years ago. This one was run very efficiently, and the owner was quite reserved. At the Christmas party that year, a new mechanic hired an escort as his plus one. They both got very drunk, and she was doing some wild, provocative moves on the dance floor. I was a landscaper for them and did not work in the dealership much, but I do not remember seeing him again after the holidays. They routinely reduced people's hours for the winter due to the obvious slowdown, but maybe firing that man helped increase a couple of people's hours that year. Story 69. Upon moving into my small, modest but private work office, I noticed that the drop ceiling was sagging in multiple places. I figured I could fix it myself. The previous office occupant had a drinking problem. I found 43 empty vodka bottles. He would just sling his empties up into the ceiling. My boss, security, and the facility staff were all surprised. Story 70. My friend got his pants leg caught in the rotating shaft of a sawmill. There was a 200 horsepower diesel engine on one end and the saw on the other. His jeans were torn apart as he stumbled towards the shaft. When he jumped up, he was only wearing his underwear. Story 71. A customer died in the bathroom of the restaurant where I was working during a busy weekend. When you walked in the door, the restaurant was on the left side. The bar was on the right side, surrounding a horseshoe-shaped counter. The public restrooms were located behind the bar. When emergency medical services wheeled the deceased out on a gurney, it was highly visible to everyone on both sides of the building as they left. No one lost their appetite or left. I wanted to quit because I had recently been traumatized by my brother's suicide. I could not afford to do so, having already taken a lot of unpaid time off. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.